Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. Welcome back to Blue Boards. This time we're going to be checking out 6 Nimmt by Wolfgang Kramer. The autofocus is not working today, that's not a good sign. So this game is considered a bit of a classic in the board game sphere, at least in some circles, including the circle that includes the friend who owns this game and let me borrow it to do this video, so he's probably going to kill me the next time I see him. But I'm not actually the biggest fan of this game. I didn't like it at all back when I first played it, but now that I've actually got a decent group to play it with, something's changed, and I'll be happy to tell you what that is at the end of this video. But with that said, let's get on to actually talking about the game's rules, because they're really simple. You start out with 4 rows, each of which that has 1 card, so they look like this number 32 right here. And the idea of the game is to avoid picking up rows. How do you end up picking up rows? Everyone involved has 10 cards in their hand to start with, and everyone picks 1 card from their hand and puts it face down, and when everyone's done that, everybody simultaneously reveals the cards that they put face down. So in this case, we'll do it, and we have a 5, a 35, and a 64. And going from the lowest number up, we put these cards in the rows. So, we'll start with the lowest number, of course, which is the number 5. Now, the number 5 is currently lower than the rightmost card in every one of these rows, the 61, the 92, the 32, and the 86. So, in this case, it will get to take whatever row that it wants, count the bullheads on it, and add it to their score. So in this case, they're going to take the 32, because it's currently the lowest by far, with only 1 bullhead. You can see that the top row and the bottom row have a total of 5 bullheads, the second row has a total of 9 bullheads, and this was only 1 bullhead, so the choice was obvious. And the idea of the game is to avoid game points, because once someone gets to 66 points, also referred to as bullheads, the game will end after that round. And if the player in question with the lowest bullheads is the winner. It's really that simple. Now we move on to the rest of the cards that we had flipped face up. So number 35. Cards that need to be put down in the row that is, in ascending order, the closest number. So, 61, 92, and 86 won't work because this is 35, and that would make them descending order. So, in this case, it would go right there. Now, we do the 64. The 64 would have to go in the top row, because while 35 and 64 is in ascending order, the 61 up there is closer. So, it needs to go in what's closest. And whenever a row gets 6 cards like that, it is filled up. And the player who filled up the row takes the 5 cards that were in the row previously as score for themselves. So, in this case, this poor player would be getting 5 bullheads of score, and this number will move down here in order to start the next row. And since all the cards have been played out, everyone picks a new card to put face down, and you go again. You go until you get to that 66 point limit. So the game is relatively simple, right? But there is still a fair amount of strategy that you can do within it in order to at least keep things interesting between the hands. So just to give you an example, right? You know very well that there are, in the cases that we've been working with here, you know there's at least 2 unknowns going down on the table in front of you, right? You don't know what the other players are going to play. And of course, since the board resolves from lowest to highest, it means that the board state can change before you're realistically able to go in. But of course, you're able to think about this. So let's just say that I wanted to take that one up there, that 64, because I find myself thinking, I don't have any cards that aren't going to get me in trouble. Like, for whatever reason, I got between an 87 and a 91 in all of my other cards, just because I have bad luck and the rows turned out that way, right? So it ends up being an interesting idea, because you could put down, let's say this 12, right? And so everyone else could go above you, and you're free to take that row, and then a couple of other people will follow in behind you, being reasonable to do that. But imagine if someone else is having the same thought, and they're thinking, I'll play this 2. This 2 will let me take a row and therefore avoid danger, but then someone else might be thinking, okay, I'll play this 12, so I can just slot in next to them. So both of them are thinking they're going to end up taking a row, but because someone put down this 2, that means they're the one that ends up taking the row, and the player who put down the 12 just gets to slide on in next to them. And there are, of course, other examples of this. There are examples of locking out the board of specific high numbers. Like for right now, you can see that every number between 87 and 91, because there's a 92 there, will cause someone to pick up this row. If you have a bunch of low numbers and you manage to lock a row with these high numbers, you're potentially getting yourself an out just because you can lock out a row in that way. And there are a lot of other just little strategies along these lines that do keep the game interesting as it goes on. And the way that you've got this system set up where the board slowly resolves along the lowest to highest means that you've got a fair amount of room to think about what other players are going to put down, and it might just end up in a situation where you'll want to put down like a 36 or something, or just, let's just say you're putting down a number, and then someone else puts down something that gets rid of the row that you planned on putting that in on, resulting in your only option to put that number in a row that's about to be taken. There are plenty of these situations like that, where someone else will come along with a lower or higher number and screw you out of your plan. And of course, then there are just situations where you'll end up just needing to play the highest number possible, because you'll be thinking to yourself, okay, if I put down a number that's high enough, everyone else might clear the board for me. Or at the same time, they might clear the board for you, but then someone else might end up building another row back up, and next thing you know, you've taken another row that you weren't planning on taking in the first place. There are a lot of minor little strategies like that that you can take. At the same time though, to me personally, it's kind of let down by one simple fact. You get 10 random cards in your hand at the beginning of every round. You have no choice over what these cards are. You have no way to predict what they're going to be. You have no way to know what the other players are going to have in their hands. Now, there is an advanced rule set in the rules themselves that lets you do card drafting instead of just having them randomly dealt out. But yeah, that takes a really long time and requires a lot of memory, and I can't imagine that being fun in the slightest, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. So you just kind of end up with the 10 cards that you've got. And sometimes you might end up with a lot of low cards, which means you'll be taking a lot of these rows, and eventually these rows are going to build up because the other players are all piling on top, and you're just going to have to be picking up. Or you're going to be having a lot of high cards, at which point you're going to be stuck putting them all on the ends of rows. Sometimes you can pull some fancy strategic maneuvers, like for example, putting down a really high number as soon as you're capable at the beginning of the round in order to just get it out of your hand, lock down a row, and make everything really hard for everybody. But when you've got 3 or 4 high numbers, that tends not to work very well. So if just by bad luck, you could end up with a really bad hand, and as a result, you just got no way out of it. Or sometimes you'll just end up self-destructing over and over and over again because you're doing what feels like the smart moves, but everyone else's hand is unpredictable because, let's just say you're playing in a 5-player game. The game supports up to 10 players, but I imagine that's a bit of a pain. So the thing about it is that you've got a 104 card deck, and as a result, there are so many numbers throughout this deck, and there's no way to accurately predict what all your opponents have. Like, you can make the sort of, like, you know, sort of explanation to yourself, like, okay, they've been playing a lot of high numbers, which means they can't have that many left, but you can't truly know for sure. You can also just have a look at the general state of the board and see some general potential things that people might want to go for, but again, you can't be sure of what the other players are going to have, therefore it's just a guessing game sometimes. The game can feel a fair bit random at times, and you can just end up randomly self-destructing or having a bunch of high or low numbers, and as a result, you'll just end up losing. And the first time I played this game, that was exactly how I felt, because I played it on the website Board Game Arena, which automates everything, but doesn't have much in the way of, like, actually chatting between people, and they're just playing the game as they go. But the best way to play 6 Nimmt by a significant margin is to be playing with friends. If you're sitting around the table with a handful of other people who you're willing to laugh at, you're willing to point the finger and go, ha ha, over their misfortune because they managed to self-destruct again, or you managed to put down a number that absolutely killed their strategy, forcing them to take a row and giving them a total of 20 points in one go or something along those lines. If you're playing with a group that's willing to do that sort of pointing and laughing, you will have way more fun. You'll all be pointing at each other, you'll all be laughing at each other, and everyone will eventually have to put on the hat of the dunce cap, where everyone's like, oh, I just did the stupidest thing imaginable. I just completely put down the wrong card. I meant to put this number, but it ended up going to this row because I forgot that was the number on the end. And everyone will have a good laugh about it, more or less. And when you do that, this game is much more fun. Especially when you can just work out that one little bit of strategy and you feel that little bit smarter for making it, but at the same time, it is still a relatively random thing. And thankfully, unless you're playing with like 10 people, games of this can be over in something like 20 minutes. It says 45 minutes on the box, but when you've got a bunch of people who know what they're doing, a decent score counter, and you're just shooting the shit while you're throwing all these cards out, they go by in no time, really, so having bad luck never really affects you for that long. And of course, it can go both ways. Come from behind victories are not only, actually capable of happening, but they can actually happen in some really interesting ways, to the point where, in 2 games that I've had over the past couple of weeks, we had someone who was in second trying to go for the lead, who managed to pull ahead and win by 1 bullhead. Meanwhile, I was coming last in another game with something like 60 points, and somehow for an entire round of 10 cards, I managed to dodge every single row grab. Meanwhile, another player was just constantly picking them up, and I managed to fall behind the lead by like 40 points at the end of that one, and that was a heck of a lot of fun. It's random. It can be kind of rough when you're playing it and you're constantly self-destructing. And if you're playing it against like digital opponents who may as well be bots on something like Board Game Arena, I would find no fun in it whatsoever. But when you're shooting the shit with friends, when you're willing to point the finger and laugh at them, and when you're just willing to relax and have fun laughing at people and their misfortune, this game suddenly gets a lot better. And I'm not going to deny that there is absolutely tension when everyone's got a card down and you're flipping them all up and waiting to see how all the rows are going to go down in order to, see if you actually manage to avoid getting to 66 before someone else does or not. That is there. Admittedly, for me personally, I find it a bit trumped by the randomness, but when you just add in those little sprinkles of playing with friends, it works well enough. Not something I'm going to play more than twice in a row on any particular night, but it's a good warm-up. It's good fun in that sense. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima, and I'll see you all next time.